Hi everyone, this is Paul here with a report on Venus retrograde from the March the 3rd until early hours of 15th of April. This particular retrograde isn't very common because of Venus's proximity to Earth, so she only goes retrograde about once every 18 months or so. So after Mars, her retrograde is the second rarest, so we don't often get a feel for what her retrogrades are like in the same way that we do with Mercury retrograde, who goes retrograde 3 times a year. And with Venus retrograde, it's not always entirely obvious what is going on, because Venus is about our values and our style of relating with one another, whereas Mercury is about the rational functioning. So with Mercury, we can kind of analyse what's going on or identify it. With Venus, it tends to be a bit more unconscious. Now, the thing to bear in mind with Venus, she rules two signs, Taurus and Libra. Both of them to some extent deal with values, but Taurus is our innate organic values, and you can see it generally most with young kids, because look at them, they instinctively know what they like and dislike. There's no undermining or undervaluing their own system of values. But as we grow older, we tend to be conditioned to be more Libran in terms of values, so we may feel that something just isn't right for us, but we've been taught that it's not nice to just reject something outright, so we put up with something which may actually be bad for us, and we need to reflect on this side of things. But with relationships, Venus retrograde may indicate the time we start reassessing our relationships, re-evaluating what's going on with them, and seeing, do we feel like we're valued in relationships? Does the relationship feel right for us? Now, with the retrograde starting in Aries, this means that the main thing maybe assessing is, do we feel like our own sense of self-identity is respected in the relationship? Is our independence needs respected by the other partner? And is there equal balance? It tends to be quite an objective sort of energy, but it can also be impulsive. So we may be trying to figure out this time, do we feel like our own independent needs are being respected, and can we just be our own unique self-identity, or do we feel like we're having to compromise who we are just to keep the other person happy? Which, at the end of the day, we shouldn't have to compromise who we are. It's one thing to be improving who we are as people and aiming to be the best versions of ourselves. If we're having to compromise our own sense of self-identity in order to keep the partner happy, then clearly there's something wrong here. But at the same time, it's important that we don't jump to conclusions either. In the same way that with Mercury retrograde, it's generally not a good idea to make any decisions in Mercury-related areas like business, communication, buying electronic items, signing any contracts. With Venus, because our value system is operating slightly differently at this time, it's important that we don't make any key relationship decisions during the course of the retrograde, because when the retrograde ends, we may be feeling very differently to how we did during it, and so therefore it's best to hold off any key relationship decisions until after the retrograde. Now, obviously, if it's a relationship where clearly things are abusive, that's different. We'd never condone staying in that sort of relationship, and that kind, it's important that you do find a way to get out of it. But if it's just a case of dissatisfaction with the relationship as it is, by all means use the retrograde to find out why it feels unsatisfying, or why you're feeling slightly different with your partner than you might ordinarily. But don't make any snap judgments on it at this point in time, because it may well be that it's a temporary fleeting moment, and you don't want to make any key important decisions relationship wise on that fleeting feeling. And it's also time to reflect on our value system. So we all have an innate one within us that we were born with, but for most of us, through societal conditioning, it's become suppressed in some way. So the values we may consciously espouse when Venus is direct will suddenly be almost undermined by an unconscious set of values which is still there from when we're young, but because it's been pushed down into our unconscious mind, we don't really understand why our behaviour is suddenly changing. Ultimately, it's down to these unconscious values making themselves known, and they tend to be quite earthy values. So we may suddenly find ourselves trying to enjoy things which are quite sensual in nature, when ordinarily we might be someone who avoids that kind of thing, isn't really interested. And our tastes and things and our sense of what is beautiful can also change during the retrograde. And it may just be for the course of the retrograde, it may not be a long-term change at all, but the things that we value, the things that we assign beauty to, and the things that we feel an attraction towards may be different to our normal, or what we deemed our usual sense of values, the ones that we consciously espouse. And when this is happening, if you can, see if you can figure out what is the underlying value behind this sudden change, because it'll be something innate within us, but because it's been pushed down into the unconscious, it's not something that we necessarily know how to control or necessarily understand it, because it's been isolated from our sense of self for a long time. So Venus retrograde is a good time to try and understand what our innate values are, rather than the ones that we've been conditioned to accept by society. And if we can figure out what these values are, which isn't necessarily easy, because values tend to operate below the level of intellect to some extent, they tend to be more unconscious. If we can figure out what they are and incorporate them into ourselves, and obviously allow them to change slightly as they're integrated, so that we become more whole in ourselves, then we start to use Venus retrograde for its full potential, and may suddenly find ourselves acting on desires or tastes which normally are suppressed, and we don't know why we're suddenly being impulsive about things that we feel attracted to, when ordinarily we might be a bit more reflective and a bit more evaluate things carefully, because Venus rules the evaluation system of our mind, our sense of judgment. She's the one that all the information from Mercury passes through before Mars takes action based on how the information has been evaluated. So during this time, the way that we evaluate things is likely to be different to normal, and with it being in Aries, maybe more objective than normal, or maybe a bit more impulsive than normal. So these are things to bear in mind. Doesn't mean that that's how we will be, but something to watch out for. And then in April, Venus backtracks into Pisces, so back into the last sign of the zodiac. And at this point, we may start assessing, is there enough sense of universal love and compassion in our relationships? Is there empathy there? And do we value universal love, or is there something unconscious within us that undermines these values of transcendental love and selfless giving towards others, as long as we don't go into martyrdom, because that's never a healthy attitude to take. It's one thing to sacrifice something in a positive way, because the original meaning of sacrifice to make something holy, but we need to make sure that we're not sacrificing things just to try and maintain some kind of stability, and we're not doing it out of a sense of martyrdom. It needs to come from a heart-based sacrifice, not doing something with the intention of getting something in the long run. That goes on up until the end of the retrograde, on 14th to 15th of April, depending on where you are. But those are the two key themes. First, our sense of independence, and then secondly, is there enough compassion and unconditional love in our relationships, or is it something that needs to be worked on, or is this a relationship that we thought was really good for us but clearly isn't anymore? But as I stressed before, avoid making any key relationship choices until after the retrograde is over, because the values that we may be operating on during it are quite often different to what we consciously espouse and what we're normally attracted to. So wait until after the retrograde is done, but see if you can reflect on the values that your choices are indicating, because that allows us to get more in touch with who we really are underneath, and tap into our innate value system, which, as I've said before, is often suppressed through conditioning and is making itself known to us through the Venus retrograde. I hope that's a useful indication of what we can expect, but ultimately the skies aren't going to control us. It's up to us to take advantage of this energy, to know ourselves better, and to make changes when necessary, become truer to our innate sense of self that we were born with before we're conditioned to be something that we're not. But it's entirely up to us whether we harness this energy or whether we just let it go past by and wait another 18 months before the next retrograde to try going through this process. So I hope that's useful and is a useful guide for figuring out how to utilise this retrograde for full benefit, but ultimately it's our choice whether we engage in it or not. Take care, and may there be many blessings from the retrograde.